All right, greetings, you unshrinking, undaunted, unflinching Herle Burlyites. What your earbuds can't see unless you're watching the pod on the YouTube Industrial Complex is that our worldwide Herle Burly headquarters, part of the air quotes media empire, has officially moved from the wilds of Denholm, Quebec back to Toronto, Ontario. It's good to be in a place where I don't have to hand crank my internet signal. Today on the pod, a returning guest. One of my favorite guests, if I'm being completely honest. Chris Arnade is a writer, the author of the incredible book Dignity, a photographer, a thinker, a former bond trader, a walker. By that, I don't mean a zombie, I mean a walker. He walks a hell of a lot, and just a fascinating human being to talk to. We had him on the show about 15 months ago, and I've really wanted to have him back on here. Today, we're going to talk to him about a lot of the stuff that animates him, and we're going to largely focus on how the liberal agenda in the United States is not connecting with the back row, as Chris calls them, the underclass. Why don't they want what the liberal elite wants them to want? Chris Arnade, thanks for coming back onto the Herle Burly. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Where are you?
I'm upstate New York, in my home, and sitting in my chair, watching, preparing to watch NFL games. Or, I mean, not today, I guess tomorrow, but watching, I just keep the NFL channel on and I just watch highlights.
Watching the annual Detroit Lions beating.
Yeah, exactly. Watch them fail again.
Well, last I caught up with your walking tour, you were in Albany.
Yeah, I walked. I live like 2 hours away from Albany, so I spent 3 or 4 days up there walking. I just finished walking yesterday, kind of from Albany to Troy, which is kind of like a 12-mile distance. Yeah, I'm doing this series of where I just walk across towns. I spend 3 or 4 days in a town, and then or more, depending on, and do 1 or 2 very, very long walks, just literally across town. So,
and why?
It's a good way to meet. Good way to meet people. Good way to see things. I'm also kind of just restless. I think COVID made me restless, and being locked down. And it's just, I just really like. I've always walked. It's kind of how I got into doing what I do now. Was just taking real long walks in New York City. Just You meet people, you see things you didn't expect to see, and you kind of engage with kind of towns and on a very different level. Where you just can't really hide from things, and so you're forced to confront stuff, and it also helps me stay relatively thin compared to what I used to be. So there is that. I mean, there is a health component, but
right.
And I think when I walk too. So I'm always it's kind of my meditation.
It's a little different than what you did earlier. It feels more observational and less intimate with the people, and less interactive with the people than the work that led you to write Dignity.
Yeah, I mean, I do spend a lot of time talking to people. I'm less. There's something I feel a little bit awkward. I mean, I think the whole thing of going and getting someone's story has a very odd, creepy feel almost, and so I feel kind of like. I do talk to people. I get their stories, and mostly at night when I'm done with my walks, or when I'm resting in McDonald's from my walks. I mean, if you walk 20 miles, you got to take breaks. And I to charge my phone, use a bathroom. I do that mostly in McDonald's or places like that, or Starbucks. And I usually I spend like 45 minutes, an hour there talking to people. And then at night, I go into dive bars or whatnot. I do talk to people, but yeah, I'm kind of trying to. I take what I learned from the people and I try to put it into a different format, less about X, John 52 years old said this to me, more about some dude said something to me. I think it's more ethical in some ways. But yeah, I mean, and also COVID, it's like, I don't particularly want to, the method I had was very literally hands-on, you're dealing with addicts and homeless people, and it's a lot of physical intimacy, close contact, and I like everybody else don't particularly want to get COVID, so there is a little bit more distance than in the past.
Okay, let's start with defining this term for people: the back row. You sort of have a construct of the front row and the back row. Who's in the back row? Who are these people?
It's generally anybody without an elite college degree. So I think it's easier to find the front row, which is basically people like me who either have a PhD or postgraduate degree, or maybe went to Harvard or Columbia, or I'm not sure what the Canadian equivalent of those are. But went to these 5 or 6 institutions or 8 institutions, and then basically define themselves through their resume. They're all about their career, and they'll do basically anything to advance their career. That includes moving, that includes taking their family to different countries. They're very transient, and very focused on career. And the defining central feature is education, going through these credentialed institutions and building a resume through life. The back row is kind of the opposite of that, or people who don't necessarily do that. High school graduates, they're very proud of being high school graduates. That's where they end the line of education. It can be also people who went to kind of like community colleges for a few years and maybe a few state schools might have, but it's anywhere from, and it's not just about class. It's not just about inequality. You can have some very wealthy people in the back row, guys who, usually it's guys who might have started a lawn care business and expanded to 3 or 4, and might have, started a tire company, auto body shop or something, and now has 2 or 3 auto body shops and franchised them or whatever. But, how they define themselves is not through basically where they went to school, unless it's high school, unless like they're the Fighting Pirates or whatever. And I've maintained, this is something I saw in my work. My work, basically, this type of work, going out and talking to people, and literally just spending weeks in communities where people don't, live but don't visit. I saw the biggest, to me, the biggest and most salient gap inequality in the U.S. was over education, and so I came up with the front row, kind of me. To describe the people I came from, the bond traders I used to be part of, the physicists I used to be a community of, and the journalists I'm now a community of. We in the front row basically are a very distinct group, and even though we may be some on the left and some on the right, we tend to share a lot of cultural qualities that make us much more similar than to the people we make policy for.
So I would have thought there'd be quite a difference between somebody who went to a state university and is now an accountant for the government, versus the kind of marginalized addicts and others you found hanging around McDonald's and places like that in dignity.
Yeah, there is variation in each group, and there's a lot of variation in the back row. And maybe we can get to this in this conversation. Part of that variation in the back row is what drives the politics, which is I think in terms of introduction, you were saying along the lines of why doesn't the back row want the politics that let's say the left wants it to use, and part of that's because there is divisions in the back row, and the divisions in the back row are very strong, and they're basically between what I would call the working poor, the person who has a went to welding school, has an F-150, maybe F-450, lives in a simple ranch house, with their wife and 3 kids, and, likes a bass fish on the weekend, versus the dependent poor, who is in and out of government assistance. There's often a race component to that, but it's not nearly as large as people think. I mean, the dependent poor is not just blacks, and the working poor is not just whites. It's much more complex than that. But the dependent poor and the working poor does not particularly like the dependent poor, and the dependent poor does not necessarily like the working poor. And so, there's this real entrepreneurial spirit in the back row, despite the fact, despite everything I said, when it comes to work, there's a real entrepreneurial spirit. There's what I would call an ethos called the decency of hard work. That's kind of like, that's kind of what that's how you build your moral system. Like, I may not have much, but I work hard and I play by the rules. And, in every block you go to in the background community, you go to any poor working class town, black, white, Latino, there are 10 houses, 8 of them have American flags, mowed lawns, people struggling to do their best to get work their 2 shifts, and then there's 2 houses where things fall apart. The police are called 3 times a month. There are loud parties at 2 a.m. There's chaos. There's broken stuff. The hinges fall off, and it's
Chris, that's my house, Chris. For God's sake.
but there's this kind of tension where the 8 other houses kind of look at the other house and go like, excuse my language, what the fuck?
Right.
Like, I'm pulling. Everybody in this house is working, and nobody in that house is, and they're just getting as much as me. No, that's not the way I want it. And so I think there's this real tension when it comes to kind of universal social programs, and there's this real entrepreneurial spirit. One of the things I've always said that the left, in particular, the intellectual left, the front row left, gets wrong about the poor, who now they don't know, by the way. They don't physically know them. They're just there's this political entity they play around with. How they see them is as kind of they expect them to hate the rich. They don't hate the rich. It depends on, first of all, it depends on how that person made. What they hate is somebody who makes a lot of money but doesn't seem to contribute anything they understand. So intellectuals, in many cases, academics, there is this I'll use two complete contrasts. Like look at Donald Trump versus Elizabeth Warren. Donald Trump, they can aspire to Donald Trump. They understand Donald Trump. Like, he builds big fucking buildings and puts his name on it. Like that, if their cards have been, if their cards had fallen in the right way, they can, say, hey, I might have been that person. If I had a little beginner's luck and I had to had some right breaks, enough hard work, I might be a person who builds really big buildings. Elizabeth Warren, what does she do? Harvard law professor? Like they can't, they don't even know what that means, much less they can't aspire to it. There's an aspirational quality there, and so there's a lot of admiration amongst the working class for wealthy people, but people who seem to have made their money in a way that they can understand and seem to contribute something, to society. They don't understand what I do. I mean, they're like, what do you do for a living? I mean, I get this conversation all the time. Like, you write books.
What do you do for a living?
I write books about, I write articles and books and I walk around and take pictures, I mean, that's just like, what, that's weird, man. And I know
the exact quote, and I want to get it on the record because it really fascinated me. The exact quote was, one of the harder lessons from my last 10 years, and I just have to say, I said it in my email to you, please do not, you're an educated person, please do not contribute to the decline of the word difficult. People are using hard when difficult is the correct term. But anyway, you said, one of the harder lessons from my last 10 years driving and walking all over the country, listening to people rarely listened to, is the working class doesn't want the politics I wanted them to want. And this resonated incredibly strongly with me as a liberal, because, I mean, I sort of have this construct in my head that, the parties of the center and the center left are actively trying to reduce income disparity, actively trying to improve the lives of people in poverty, actively trying to provide upward ramps through easier access to education. Republicans in the States, conservatives in Canada don't generally support any of that, and yet get a lot of, and sometimes most of, the working class votes. And that's exactly what you expressed, and maybe you can just expand on the idea a little bit.
I mean, one of the issues, again, is I think there are two things going on. One is what I just talked about the kind of, there's a rift in the back row. There's an actual strong entrepreneurial spirit, at least here in the U.S., amongst the working class. They believe in the decency of hard work. I've heard people bluntly tell me, like people who are in bad situations, like they don't want to take a handout. That's what they call it, a handout. Okay, I mean, I'm using language they're using. I know we in the left don't want to particularly use that language, but that's the language they use. But also is how people experience politics, and political parties are, the way I think about it is, and I'll use the NFL analogy or football, is how the back row thinks about politics. Is how a lot of people think about sports, right? Which is, or the NFL. It's something that is kind of in their life, but not really important. It might be entertaining, but they're not a player. They just watch. And there's a big removal between politics and them, and and consequently there's a deep cynicism. I think I use the phrase "same shit, different asshole." Like their life still sucks. You have Obama. I had so many people talking to people in 2016 tell me, like, including black people, straight up, saying like, what, Obama, Clinton, Bush, it was all the same. This road still sucks. This potholes is still here. The factories are still gone. The place is still filling with drugs. So there's a real removal from politics where what filters down is just themes. And quite honestly, it's like if you, I'm going to sound sexist here, but if you have a spouse or wife who, the person who watches the Super Bowl because everybody else is watching the Super Bowl, that's all they know about politics. That's all they know about the NFL. And so they know, like, the New England Patriots are good. They know these big things, right? Oh, look, the New England Patriots are always in it. The Buffalo Bills are never. Like, these are kind of like, and the Detroit Tigers and Detroit Lions really suck. That's it. It's these broad kind of marketing based themes. And in that sense, what really matters a lot is culture. Like, we don't talk a lot about culture on the left because it has, there's been this negative culture of poverty used by the right, but whatever. But culture matters. Like, who is this person who's coming into my neighborhood and claiming to get my vote? Are they like me? Do they look like me? Do they act like me? Like, they're a kid who went off to, like, they might have come from humble beginnings, but, they've been a Harvard law professor now for 20 years. Like, they don't share anything with me. Like, there's just, I don't really want that person in power, because I don't think that person, I'm not going to root for that team because that team's not going to, I don't think they're going to give me anything I want. And so there's this two things going on. One is there's this immense gap. I mean, politics doesn't seem to affect their life, but in bad ways. And even when good things happen, it's kind of hard to detach who did it versus, because both teams suck. And, I like the team that kind of looks and acts more like me, that kind of lives like I do, that kind of is, isn't kind of talks about things like I talk about them. And so I think the left, certainly in the US, has done itself a huge disadvantage by becoming an activist class, a class of people who is highly educated, highly informed, and also highly bubbled, highly geographically bubbled. And so these people, like, and there's a sense, at least in the marketing from the left, that we're always condescending. We're telling people, and the most condescending thing you can say is, like, you're voting against your best interest. Like, what do you mean? I know what my best interest is, motherfucker. Like,
right?
What are you doing telling me what my best interest is? So. And again, I think you add that all up, and I think the left we have done a very bad job of marketing, of building a brand and marketing. And in many cases, that matters more than the actual policies that get implemented at the end of the day,
I'd like to share this message from our presenting sponsor, TELUS, following the unprecedented weather events and flooding in British Columbia that sent the province into a state of emergency. TELUS believes strongly in the need to support the communities in which we live, work, and serve, and we have always strived to do so. The floods that ravaged BC last week, and which have caused so much disruption in TELUS's home province, have impacted its customers, team members, partners, and suppliers alike. So TELUS is committing $1 million in support of British Columbia flood relief. This includes money given to the Canadian Red Cross, food banks across the province, the BC SPCA to support their work to help animals and livestock in affected areas, as well as in-kind support in health, network, and community services. TELUS remains committed to being the company that is at its best when things are at their worst, and they'll keep offering their resources and human compassion to help their fellow citizens in need. TELUS also encourages anyone wishing to join them in offering support to contact organizations registered to provide goods and services in affected areas, including the Red Cross or the BC SPCA. So now I'm going to turn you into a strategist. I'm going to turn you into an advisor. You used the example of Elizabeth Warren.
Yep.
I think Elizabeth Warren's fucking amazing, right? And I thought Elizabeth Warren had the most well thought through, comprehensive agenda for addressing social inequality in the United States that I've ever seen out of a serious candidate for the presidency. Obviously, none of the people you're talking to felt that way about her because of cultural distinctions. What would you have advised her to do differently to try to reach those people?
I mean, I'm going to give you my favorite candidate as an example, Bernie. Okay. So, but I'm using an example of Bernie. I would have voted for Bernie. I voted for Bernie, and if I didn't vote for Bernie, I would have voted for Elizabeth Warren because I genuinely agree with you. But I also knew that there was zero chance Elizabeth Warren was going to win. Like I knew that from my time. Again, I don't want to. People are going to say I sound like a right-wing talking point, but just watch the video of her drinking a beer. Like it's one of the most cringy, painful things to watch if you're somebody who has any kind of experience with the working class. I mean, Bernie managed to, going back to the aspirational thing, Bernie managed to pull it off because Bernie is the crumpled community college professor who's kind of eccentric in the town, but everybody knows and kind of gets. They might have had him, that's what he tracks as. So he had a relatable kind of image. He was also very simple. He had one issue that he hammered over and over and over and over. I heard so many people say, people like, who had voted for Trump say like, hey man, I may not like old man Bernie, but I get him. I respect him. He I know what he stands for. He wants to, and he doesn't relent. He's over, like Elizabeth Warren was scattershot. She had planned for everything. It was just like, no man, like people don't have a lot of time for this. So first of all, Sanders and Trump are very similar. They hammer the same point. Make America great again, inequality. Make America great again, inequality. Simple messaging. But also, what I would say is Bernie Sanders is from the whitest state in the United States. The base of the Democratic Party, especially in the primary system, is heavily working class blacks. Working class blacks are the back row. Okay, Bernie had absolutely no cultural overlap, none. I went to Bernie rallies where I keep on using this word cringe. It was one of the most painful experiences. Thousands of white people, embracing this white guy talking about racial justice. And just, and Bernie lost to Hillary because he lost the black working class vote. He got almost none of it. So he had 4 years to fix that. Right. He had 4 years between 2016 and 2020. He knew what South Carolina, I don't know if in the U.S., and he needed to win South Carolina. Biden ended up winning. All he had to do in those 4 years is go to South Carolina and do retail politics. South Carolina is a notable state. The black population is in like basically 30 counties, what's called the Black Belt. It runs through the South. It's where minority counties. He would have sit there in the black churches. He would have hugged people. He would have listened to them. He would have gone to, he would have gone to Fish Fries. He would have built retail politics. He would have lived in South Carolina. He would have lived in Georgia. He would live in Alabama and Mississippi, and built relationships at a personal level and figured out how to interact. He didn't do that. Instead, he hired a bunch of academic blacks and activists, who had PhDs, who,
Mm-hmm.
I like a lot of the people he hired, but you know what? Like, they didn't connect. And that was just a complete misunderstanding of the working class. Like, that's not how you win. Book about racial inequality in the United States and having them go on a panel with you. You know, you get the bet. You do. It was how Biden won the primary. He went to he's been in politics for 60 years, and he has those connections in South Carolina, and so he won South Carolina. Everybody had written him for dead. He won South Carolina, and he won because of the black vote. And from then on, it was on to the presidency. And so there's this just like out of touchness that, like, you know, I can't tell Sanders or Warren. And the thing about Elizabeth Warren that's so frustrating, when she did talk about her working class roots, she was very good. Like, you know, but she has been a Harvard faculty member for 20 years now, you know, like, and there's just some level of out of touchness that comes across that you can't fix that. And again, having a plan for everything is so front row. That's how we solve everything. We have a plan for everything. That's not how the back row operates. It's much more experiential. It's much more kind of fly by the seat of pants. It's much more common sense. Like, you know, again, what Trump did, man. Like, you know, if Trump had come from the left, his campaign would have been, you know, we would have books about the genius of his campaign, how he connected to people, the simplicity of message. He used free, you know, it was self-funded. He went through, like, you know, he did these big rallies like a rock star, you know, he connected with people. Look, I don't like Trump, man, but I can tell you, walking across the street like I did one day from a Bernie rally to a Trump rally was just going from this really boring, kind of soulless place in, like, you know, filled with white people, you know, wearing banners, to this raucous, almost like it was like a comedy club rock star that was actually surprisingly diverse, man. Like if you had to ask me which one I would have spent time, it was just more fun. Like, as simple as that. Like, again, I don't like the politics, but, you know, you got to be entertaining and simple. You can't be droll and academic.
Well, it's pretty clear British Columbians are paying a heavier price than most for climate change. Last summer, BC suffered some of the hottest temperatures in the world. The heat and resulting fires killed hundreds of people in the Pacific Northwest. Now, just months later, an atmospheric river has channeled an unimaginable amount of rain into the province. Tens of thousands of British Columbians have been forced to flee their homes. The flooding has killed livestock and triggered deadly landslides. Our sponsor, CN, has thrown itself into relief efforts. The railway has extensive operations in the province, and many of its employees live in the interior. This week, CN pledged $100,000 to the Red Cross. It has been working with provincial emergency management officials, organizing evacuations, delivering medical equipment, and escorting healthcare workers to stranded areas. Still, the floods closed all roads and rail lines between the Lower Mainland and the rest of Canada for days. And it all just emphasized how vital CN is to Canada's economy. In 2020, CN moved 300 million tons of cargo along nearly 20,000 route miles from coast to coast and deep into the United States. It actually set a record last year for moving grain out of the prairies. But when trains stop running, containers of material crucial to the livelihoods of producers, manufacturers, and retailers start piling up. That happened last week. There were knock-on effects across the country. CN takes its job as Canada's main trade enabler seriously. Its employees are working night and day to restore full service in BC. Weather permitting, some normalcy should return in a few days. 2021 has been a grim year, one that followed a grim year. The only effective way to cope is together. Let's all try to keep that in mind. I'm going to riff off something James Carville was quoted recently as saying, which is about villains in narratives. So the good conservative candidates always have a clear villain. Trump, it was Mexican immigrants, it was China, it was government, and those were set up as the straw man villains, and he was going to fight those, and things were going to be good for people. Though the center left doesn't like to have a villain. Who should our villain be?
It should be rich. It should be. It should be corporations. It should be.
Well, you said they don't want to attack rich people.
No, but it's what I'm saying. So yeah. So it should be. It should be corporate. It should be the political class. It should be the political class, the corporations. It should be out of touch. I mean, out of touch. It's kind of what Trump hit on, which is the swamp. It should be corruption. It should be Google. It should be Amazon. It should be these places that are that are taking away your local communities, that are throwing your jobs overseas, that are enriching enriching their pocketbooks while stripping your town of community, of jobs. People who are in bed with China, and who just want to basically find the cheapest labor in the place, find the country with the cheapest labor and the most lax environmental standards. So I think there is if you're gonna, Bernie sometimes, and to her credit, Elizabeth sometimes went there, but again, there also the other thing, not in terms of enemy, because I'm not so sure you always need a scapegoat, but the other thing to do, I think, is the other big failure is you got to be fucking patriotic, man. You can't talk bad about the U.S. I'm not saying Biden did. Biden's good about that, but the Democratic machine, so much of the policies around it is basically,
we don't like the current United States of America.
US sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy to lampoon them, and it's not necessarily a fair lampooning to say that but again, marketing is never fair. Politics is never fair. That the Democratic elite is more interested in being a member of the UN than they are being a member of the U.S. They're more interested in kind of being a member of the world than they are being a member of us. They all. Everybody, all the kind of Mexican Americans love that. You talk to, I spend a lot of time. Some of the most time I spend is in Latino communities, is in Mexican American immigrant communities. They fucking love the U.S. They absolutely unadulteratedly love the U.S. And when they hear people talking bad about it, when they hear talking about structurally racist, it's or is built on the foundations of lies, it's like, what the fuck, man? I'm here. I came here for a reason. This is the safest, most free place I've ever been. It's a place that's giving me an opportunity. I can work hard, raise my kids, and get ahead. You want racist, go someplace else. They're much more racist than the U.S. is, man. This is a place that gave me a shot. They absolutely love the U.S. And Republicans get that wrong too, by the way. If Republicans were less racisty, they could actually pick up a fair share of Latino votes, and they eventually will, because you gotta. Don't make the U.S. the enemy is what I would say. No, it's just, that's a losing strategy. And look, Biden knows all this, and so there's in many cases, a lot of what I say, Biden is in some senses the Democrat who best embraces is the least worst at all this. He gets the working class, and that's why he won. Because they looked at the array of people on the stage, and no disrespect to Elizabeth Warren, no disrespect to Bernie, they all look loony, man. What? Biden won because he was the last man standing. He was the most normal. He wasn't talking bad about the U.S. He wasn't, he was just there to. Just a normal guy, politician who wanted to help them, and they could relate to as well. All the people, who painted him out as touch missed the point that he was, and he gets this, and so I think in many cases, what I worry about, to the degree I'm still a Democrat, what I worry about is, when Biden's gone, I'm not so sure there's anything on the horizon that he's the last vestige of the old Democratic Party that was based on unions, who did retail politics, who like, spent his life, came from relatively humble origins and never really left those relatively humble origins. Even his even his screwed up kids they get. I mean, the working class gets. Everybody has screwed up families, man.
But there are people who would disagree with you. The critique from the left of the Democratic Party is that they are failing with working class people because they are not being progressive enough, and that they need to double down. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of the primary spokespeople of this, and she's an articulate, good communicator. Would she win those votes?
AOC, look, I know AOC's district. AOC can only probably win in AOC's district. Little known fact about AOC's district is it encompasses a lot of northern Queens, which is where a lot of journalists and progressive lives, a lot of educated people live. AOC could, the Republicans are going to do all they can. AOC is going to do all she can become the face of the Democratic Party, and the GOP is going to do all they can to make her the face. Let that happen. I mean, look, I don't know if it's sexism, I don't know if it's racism, but and she's a great communicator. I give her that. She has a lot of that Trumpian quality, right? But she also has a lot of the thing that frustrates me about we can talk about social issues, right? Social, the activist left wants. Most Americans are cool with that, man. They don't like the language involved. They don't like it being jammed down their throat. They don't like the fact being told that they're the mistake. One of the really sad things is I think, look, I'm talking like 90% of the people. There are 10% of the population that are just awful racist. Okay, like generally on the right.
Yep.
That's not cool. But most other people, you know what? They're decent. They really want to be on the right side of history. If you call them a racist or a sexist, they're going to actually go, "Oh, that's bad. What can I do to change?" Like I don't want to be that person. No one wants to. And so, but you can't jam it down their throat, man. You can't come in and scold them for it. You got to basically, and in many cases they feel like they're being scolded by somebody who they don't, again, culturally kind of signals as somebody who's very front row, who's very out of touch, who they don't feel necessarily is like them, and who like sometimes has some wacky views, man. Like there are some things that is like a lot of working class people, like I spent a lot of time as the only white person in poor black neighborhoods. Almost everybody hates the police there. Almost everybody hates the policing methods there. Hates the laws. Nobody wants less police.
Right.
They want more, man. They want different police. That's cool. They want the police that the rich neighborhoods have. The type of
even most people in the black community, right? They're not against
that's
police.
What I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like nobody wants less police, man. I mean, they know that the right. This is my pet peeve of the right. About the right paints these neighborhoods as filled with crime. Like, yes, crime is 10 times higher than it is, but that doesn't mean everybody. That means that there's still only a tiny majority of people who are bad people doing crime. That tiny majority might be 5%, versus in a good neighborhood where it's 1%. But those 5% terrorize everybody. Right. They make the other 95% miserable. And the other 95% who just, again, are the decent people who keep their lawn mowed, who have the American flag, who just want to go work their job at the post office or go do whatever they do, or go to the nurse school, or drive the bus. They just want to be left alone from crime, man. They don't want to see. They want police making sure that those 5% don't terrorize their neighborhood. So it's like. I know she's not wealthy, but she identifies from a distance as a wealthy, overly educated person. And that's not good. I mean, that's not what you want to identify with. Again, somebody like Trump, who's immensely wealthy and is rotten to the core in how he got his money, doesn't track like that, doesn't market like it. It's just life isn't fair, man. Right. Like, politics isn't fair. and you know, and Biden, who's wealthy, doesn't track like he's overeducated either, which is why he won.
So Bill Clinton was a good Democratic candidate then.
Yeah, I mean, oh yeah, I mean, the dude. There's nobody more back row than Bill Clinton. Like, he's morphed into something different. He's morphed into the Davos man, and I think many people feel like he sold the working class out. People who think about it, but I've been to his hometown many times. I mean, you can't get more. Go to Harrison Hot Springs. That's in Canada. Go to Hot Springs, Arkansas, man. Like you can't. I mean, like we're talking real trash. And I say this in a lovable way. Real white trash, man. Like you're talking, casinos that have dollar wine night. You're talking about bars, where people pass out, and that's just
Right.
that's the good guy. I mean, we're talking some real back row stuff, and that's where he comes from. I mean, and the dude hasn't forgot that. He tracks like that. He's still that person. I mean, you see him operate one-on-one. You see him in especially in New Hampshire back in '92, I think it was. Like the dude, man, like he gets working class because he is. He's comes from complete trash, dysfunctional. And he never really forgot where he came from.
So are we left at the end of the day with the old Thomas Frank, what's the matter with Kansas analysis here of culture trumps economics?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I said is, when I was back in 2016, when I was getting yelled at because I said Trump has a chance to win, there was a big fight of economic anxiety versus racism, economic anxiety, and I was clearly on the economic anxiety camp. But one of the things I always said was, what the economic anxiety is it's an anxiety that everybody's making everything about economics. They're not making it about cultural issues. They like culture matters. And the thing is like the other thing I push back about when people say people are voting against their economic interests. So are liberals. Most of them are willing to raise their taxes. We're all basically battling on cultural issues, and the great untapped resource. You have those quadrants: economically populist versus economically conservative, culturally conservative versus culturally. Everybody in Wall Street, everybody in the front row, every donor class who gives a lot of money to both parties, he always says, I'm a conservative, socially liberal. Everybody in the country is the opposite. Everybody in the country is economically liberal, socially conservative. And that's just I wish they were like me, but that they're not. And that's the great untapped quadrant of politics, I guess. And when you do a graph, it's like the upper left quadrant of economically populist, socially conservative. And socially conservative basically means almost a social libertarianism. It's not conservative in the it just means leave me alone, man. Don't tell me how to live. Don't tell me don't force your stuff down my throat. Don't tell me how I live is racist. Don't tell me how I live is wrong. Let me live the way I want to do. Let me do what I want to do. And stop pushing your agenda on me. And so it's basically socially leave me alone, economically give me stuff, and that's kind of where I think the country is.
So when you say that, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about climate change. I'm thinking about the fact that over the next 30 to 40 years, the world has to undergo a massive transformation in everything. And the F-150s are gone. And the coal plant is gone. And electricity is more expensive. And how are we going to talk to the back row about this in a way that makes sense and sounds fair?
It's really, look, this is a hard issue. Okay, let me just tell you that it doesn't help that don't take people's straws away, man. I can tell you political rule number one: don't fucking take people's plastic straws away. Like the symbolic gesture, like, irritate people to a level that is like, the hypocrisy of someone like, jetting off to a conference on global warming and then telling people, you can't have straws, you're gonna have to change your life. I mean, that's got to go out the window, man. That's again, someone can come to me and tell me that's not unfair. They're actually, you know what? That's a right-wing talking point. Whatever. It's out there. People see it. It's a political reality that you can't take people. You can't have the impact fall heaviest on the working class, which is how it almost always does. I think what's going to happen. Look, climate change is not popular at all. The policies around climate change is not popular at all with the working class at all. It's like it's hated, and because often as it filters down to them, it's things taken away from them by people who are living a lot better lives than them. It just seems massively hypocritical and unfair. Okay, so to me, it's a political thing that's just not going to happen. And what does that mean? If you run the scenario forward, it means that I think we're going to have a really bad. This situation is not going to get solved. Not going to get solved. Not going to get solved. Not going to get solved till it gets so bad that basically science has to come in and try to solve it. So science got us into this mess, and hopefully science will get us out of this mess. Big climatic engineering things like like putting massive sheets in this that block some of the sun, aerosol sprayed. We're going to get so desperate. That's where we're going to have to go, right. Because the political solution, which requires a level of coordination across the country and across the globe. I look, man, like I'm just telling you as a boots on the ground guy, I don't care if you're right or wrong. If you're right, how much morally right you are, it's not going to happen. Like any party that goes down there is just going to get crushed and absolutely crushed. And
every party running for office in Canada in the last federal election supported a carbon tax. What's the difference in Canada and the United States? Why wouldn't Americans accept a tax on fossil fuels?
That's actually really interesting. So it makes me rethink my thought. What was the actual way the tax played out?
Well, it was controversial leading into the election because the Conservative Party, which represents the major oil-producing provinces in the country, has always been steadfast against a carbon tax. There were factions within their party that convinced the leadership that they couldn't win in Ontario and Quebec without having a carbon tax as part of their platform, so they controversially adopted one, and it wasn't well accepted within their own party. But nonetheless, the leadership of every party was proposing a carbon tax. We have one in Canada.
So what is the actual... What is the boots on the ground like? If you're what changed? The carbon tax changed what for people's lives?
There's I believe currently $40 a ton tax on carbon, rising to $170 over the next number of years.
Did it hit anything on their bottom line, like their pocketbook?
Not yet. It's kicking. But by the time they're done, it's going to be a pretty substantial hit. 40 cents a liter probably on gasoline.
I mean,
but nobody has realized that yet. Your point is exactly bang on. The cost is apprehended. So right now it's a aspirational goal, if you will.
I mean, when you look at it's not just U.S. When you look at when countries riot, when voters riot, it's almost always because of a big increase in gas taxes. If there was an increase in the gas tax in the U.S., a substantial one at the federal level, there'd be riots here. It's that core to the American identity. There's a libertarian. This country is huge. I can do what I want. Give me my car. Look, I'm probably the biggest walker there is. I literally walk 15 miles a day, about 12 miles away, and I walk through towns where there's I call them pedestrian fierce. So I'm about as huge a personal advocate as you can. I mean, I come close to dying every day because of a damn fucking car.
Sure.
There's nobody who's more kind of like pro pedestrian than me, but Americans love their cars, man. Like, do not fuck with their cars. Do not take their cars away. And that's a problem if you are looking at global warming. That's a problem if you're looking at these things. There's a kind of, and it's especially true given how our electoral college system works. The kind of wide states with long distances between them hold a lot of power. And so each of them has 2 senators.
Yeah.
And so someone like Bernie Sanders, Vermont happens to be small, but people still drive long distances because it's pretty rural. Someone like him is not going to be, senators from kind of rural states, which there are a lot of, more than there are senators from, don't really are going to avoid. You're going to have a hard time getting them on charge. I mean, I think I actually think the larger issue, and I don't have a lot to say about it because I don't spend a lot of time in Canada. Canada is a lot more relaxed politically than the U.S. is, and there's a question of why. Like, we have almost similar, very different demographics, but there's just a lot more kind of a communitarian, kind of less of a libertarian streak. And I'm not really sure what it is about Canada that makes it. And I think, this is one of the things.
You know what our equivalent of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is, right?
Well, guess what?
Seriously, in the Constitution, where you have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we have peace, order, and good government. Since Confederation, owning a home has been part of the Canadian dream. For most people, that dream is much more than just a monthly mortgage payment. A home is where we create our fondest memories and where we can truly be ourselves. For too many, especially young adults, that reality is out of reach and it's getting worse. The good news is our original sponsor, the Ontario Real Estate Association, or REA for short, has a plan to save the Canadian dream of home ownership. It includes lowering costs for first-time buyers, ending money laundering in the real estate market, and cutting years of red tape that is standing in the way of more affordable homes for families. The OREA plan will lay the foundation for a future where all people can find a place to call home. When we support the dreams of all of us who want to own a home, we're building healthier families, stronger communities, and a safer, more secure future for all. Read their plan at orea.com/affordable homes.
I've been doing this for 12 years, basically hanging out with normies.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, a lot of other elites, quote elites, front row people have come to me and said, like, I would like to do the same thing. I would like to do a little bit of what you did. How do I do it? And I said, look, be forewarned. You're very empathetic. You seem to have a much under. I said, be forewarned. You could replay what I did as a front row person and come out of it a raging elitist. You could look at the same thing I did and come out with with almost that, who's a friend of mine is Tom Nichols. I don't know if you know him. He wrote.
Yeah.
We get along very well personally, even though we're both very different politically. And you can come out like him and like, no, man, American voters are dumb. We need less democracy, more elitism. Like, there is another framework for all the information I have, which is that it's kind of, what you were kind of alluding to is like, if these people are not going to vote for with certain death, if these people are not going to, not vote to stop certain death, then maybe the problem here is the people, not the back row, not the front row. So I think, there's a lot of, I try my best to describe things and not, I think it was V.S. Naipaul, the Indian writer, who said something along the lines of like, I have a lot of sympathy for the mob, but I also fear the hell out of them. So, I'm not sure what the answer here is in terms of.
Well, I'm a pollster, Chris, and I've got a little sign on my desk that says, "Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large numbers."
I think one of the things I always feel is like people are really good at individual level. They're not necessarily good collectively,
right?
And with rare exceptions, people are good at the individual level. And there's a decency that kind of gets lost.
100%. The politics is overwhelming that. We're losing the sense of each other's humanity because politics is dominating the whole characterization of who we are, right?
I mean, politics now has, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but the U.S. over my lifetime has become extraordinarily political. It's like, in many cases, it's the new religion for a lot of people. And I mean, that's not, certainly for the elites it is, I mean, it's like, I think there is a thing to, especially amongst the front row academic class. I'm like, why are you so upset, man? Like, things are pretty good here. Like if you take a step back compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, it's kind of what the immigrants, again, always remind me when I spend time in immigrant communities. Like, what do you mean? We're happy as hell to be here, man. Like, this is absolutely great. Like,
I know, but the politics has got, like, I mean, it's, I don't think I would ever have said, I can't imagine being friends with somebody that supports George Bush. I wouldn't even have said that of Ronald Reagan. But I genuinely had to ask myself over the last 4 years if I could conceive of being a close friend of somebody that supported Donald Trump.
I mean, yeah, it's like, I wrote a piece about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Subsequently got erased. I forgot why the website went down, but I said why the U.S. is becoming an emerging market. And I spent a lot of time on Wall Street working in emerging markets, meaning Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Nigeria, Turkey, Soviet Union. And what defines kind of what in third world countries we used to call them, now we call them emerging markets. Good marketing. What defines them is intense politicalization, intense inequality, and a complete mistrust of elites, and the elites' complete mistrust of the working class or the front row, and a gated elite that runs stuff that's completely removed from the people, and a hatred between the two of them. But politics flip-flops between left and right there. And it yo-yos between extreme right, extreme left, extreme right, extreme left. And politics becomes not about, when people get in power, the political class gets in power, it becomes a politics of two things. One is corruption. Like, I want to get my fair share. They got their, they enrich themselves and their voters. Now it's time for me to enrich myself and voters, without regard to it becomes very, very, very into two distinct tribes where you get into power. When you got your time in power, you enrich you and your followers. And then then the next step is about being vindictive towards the other group, just harming the other group. And that's where we're moving, is where politics is about selfishness and vindictiveness. And a key component in that step is othering, which is turning the other person and dehumanizing them. So the left needs to dehumanize the right, and the right needs to dehumanize the left. And once that happens, then you can do really nasty, violent things to them. You can do policies that basically are not about helping the country, but solely about harming the other side. And I think that's where we're going. I mean, I'm not against.
How do we turn away from that path, Chris? How do we turn away from that path?
I'm not so sure. Again, it's like, I wish I could say, because it's like saying, look, I feel like I'm pointing to the fish tank and saying the water needs to be cleaned. It's dirty. Like, how do you throw out all the water and change it all? Like, I mean, when it comes to a country's culture, how do you change that? I mean, I'm at a real loss, which is partially why I'm pretty depressed about these things, which is like, I mean, you take your global warming, for example. I mean, make it as one issue where, I kind of see the solution. Or I don't get too negative, because I think some of the as a former scientist, I think some of the projections are a bit too crazy. I think we got longer time than people think, and I think we're going to solve it with science. Right. But
well, that seems to be what we've. If you look at what the scientists say the deadlines are,
but it's not to be.
Yeah. If you look at what the scientists say the deadlines are and how humanity is behaving, you have to conclude that we are all relying on some Deus Ex Machina technology development to come in.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And so, I think that's what I mean. I actually have, I do hold out a fair amount of optimism that actually that magic scientific being is out there, and we've always managed to get ourselves out of every corner. So I'm actually relatively hopeful on that, but in the other direction, I mean, look, people, a well-balanced country should not be fighting over politics all the time, man. Like, it should just be operating, and so I think some of it's perspective. Like, again, when I'm feeling particularly down, I'll go to like a Mexican bar in El Paso where, there were people who are like, I just remember, like, man, I walked across Orlando. Don't walk across Orlando. Like, it's not meant to be walked across, but which is partially why I did it. But at night, I went to a Honduran bar, if you listeners know, or Honduras is not a good place. I guess very violent, and I'm doing well by most metrics. I retired when I was 48 to do this, and I'm sitting in this bar with a bunch of working class Honduran immigrants who'd been here off and on, somewhere from like 3 years to 6 years to 2 years, who were trying to buy me drinks. Guys who work 3 shifts, raising families, on a guy who, and they insisted on buying me drinks. Like, they wouldn't let me not. It was rude, but they were loved. They were, they were the happiest people in the world, man. They were like, what do you mean? Why would I be unhappy? I got a job. I got a house to raise my kids. My kids go to relatively safe school. It's relatively safe here. Like, what do you mean, man? Like, I got everything. So I think a little perspective helps. And I wish everybody had a little perspective. But I'm not so sure we'll ever get that.
Right. All right. This was such a fascinating discussion, Chris, and I really want to keep going, but let's end on a note that will have most of my audience lighting their hair on fire. Trump's going to be the president again, isn't he?
Well, let's see. 22, I think, is in the bag. The midterm elections is probably in the bag, and the Democrats are not going. They I'm seeing some pieces now where they're, including mine, where I wrote a piece about how the Democrats are toast in 22. We have the November midterm elections. Trump's not on the ballot. I think that's probably, unless some miracle happens with COVID, I don't see that changing. Look, as you know, any prognosis and take with a grain of salt, but to the degree, I think Democrats are toast in 22. That might be the best hope the Democrats have is, America kind of likes divided government. They don't really want they don't like the GOP necessarily either. Right. They really don't, want any one party to have full control. So, and also I think, when I was saying this stuff in 2016, nobody listened to me. I was roundly mocked, run off of Twitter. Some people have come around.
Because it was impossible, Chris. It was fucking impossible, okay?
I mean, now people are coming around. They're hearing some stuff, and I'm seeing stuff written that now by kind of elite journalists that I would have written in 2016. So there's hope. The Democrats were, I think one of the most amazing things about elections is that recent elections is how close they all are, which tells you most parties are adjusting, right? Like, if we can basically, we don't have the 8% blowouts anymore, and so I think, the Democrats have 3 years now to get their act together. And I think enough of them.
Although Trump loses the popular vote badly.
I'm not so sure if you held the election in 22, Trump would win the popular vote.
Jesus fucking Christ.
People hate Biden. Look, I mean, and this is actually a little bit less about.
How can you hate Biden? He's barely alive.
This is, and again, I wrote this piece just 2 weeks ago. And it's not about some of the things we wrote about. That's a larger. What 22 is about is COVID and inflation. That's it. And Biden his team and him seeming to be a little bit loopy. Biden was not Trump, and so that everybody put their hopes and dreams as like that not Trump. And now he's Biden, and it's not wearing so well. And there's inflation, and there's COVID. He said he was going to return COVID to normal. It hasn't returned to normal. Again, this he may be blameless in all this, but that's not how it filters down to people. And so Biden is kind of hated right now, and the brand is not. It's not as high. The Democratic brand is not at an all-time high by any stretch. So I think if Trump run in 22, he would actually win the popular vote. I don't think the electoral college would be close. I think in 24, we got 3 years to fix it. So the other thing is Trump doesn't wear well. I mean, the dude actually, it's a bit like the past girlfriend and boyfriend who you're like, whoa, man, I used to date that. His shtick kind of grows old, and it grows even older with distance away. So I think Democrats are more likely. And again, you never wish Trump because he could win, but I think the Democrats are more likely to lose to a bunch of the kind of second tier minor league guys. But
they can't win the nomination.
What?
But they can't win the nomination.
Well, I mean, again, yes, exactly. So that they're all doing their best to kind of just hope Trump doesn't get in. But they are someone like DeSantis in Florida, someone like Hawley, someone like Cruz. I mean, look, people forget Cruz was going to be the Republican nominee until Trump outwhacked him. He was headed right. He had played. He read the mood. He knew the base was really angry. He knew the base was really sick of DC. He was headed right there. Then Trump jumped right in front of him, and
called him lying Ted Cruz. Told him he had an ugly wife, and the guy's been loyal to him ever since.
I mean, I think. Have you been to a Trump rally?
No.
It's stand-up comedy, man. It's crude back row stand-up comedy. And, I hate to say I find it funny because it's not cool, but it's like, I mean, you can't help but laugh sometimes.
Low energy Jeb was funny. That made me laugh.
Come on, man. Little Marco is the greatest. That one was genius, man.
Little Marco, that's right.
I mean, with one nickname, he killed the guy. I mean, you can't see Rubio now and not think of Little Marco.
No.
But it was crude, back row, put down humor, and Trump has great timing, man. As a comedian, you can't get to that level without being an entertainer, having great timing. The guy has great. He has great delivery, and it's just like you have to go at some point, man. It's just it's surreal. It's just it's nothing you've ever seen before.
Well, I'll only go if you'll come with me to keep me safe, because I think I think if I was spotted there, I'd be beaten like a narc at a biker rally.
All you have to do, I mean, believe me, man, it's actually a lot more welcoming than you realize. As long as you don't, it's like going. I keep on using NFL analogies. It's but most of your listeners may not know US, but if you know what the Las Vegas used to be, the Oakland Raiders is Las Vegas Raiders. If you ever looked at their end zone or their parking lot fans, That's what a Trump rally is like. It's like a collection of everybody,
Misfits.
man.
Yep.
Like, yeah. So I know misfit toys, man. Who of all like you of all races, man. Like over generally white, but like it's as long as you buy in, man, you're welcome. They'll give you a big bro hug, and as long as you don't tell them that you hate their man.
Well, you make me feel like I should check it out against my better judgment. Chris, what a great time I have talking to you. I really have to meet you in person now that things are getting relaxed on the border. So maybe we can swing that sometime. I'll come down to New York or something. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating conversation. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, our sponsor, CN Rail, and the Ontario Real Estate Association, Herle Burlyites. Thank you for bearing with us, and wish Chris merry walks, and we'll see you next week. Take care.